The night my father threw me out, it was raining so hard you couldn't see 3 feet in front of you. I was 19 years old. My name is Elena. And I remember standing on that porch, my one bag soaked through in under a minute, watching the door slam shut behind me. Not slowly. Not hesitantly. Hard. Like he'd been waiting years for an excuse to finally do it. I had $43 in my pocket. No coat. No plan. And a father who had just looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're not my problem anymore. Figure it out." I want you to really sit with that for a second. $43. Freezing rain pouring down so heavy it felt like the sky itself was punishing me. 19 years old. Cast out by the one man who was supposed to protect me, while my younger brother Marcus sat warm inside, feet up, playing video games on the brand new console my father had bought him just 3 days earlier. Same week he told me he had no money to help with my college application fees. That detail still lives in my chest like a splinter. I stood on that sidewalk for a long time. Not because I didn't know I had to move, but because some part of me, the part that had spent 19 years trying to earn that man's approval, kept waiting for the door to open again. Kept waiting for him to come out and say he didn't mean it. The door never opened. So I picked up my bag. And I walked. That was the night everything changed. Not because something good happened, but because something in me finally stopped waiting for him to choose me. That night in the rain with $43 and nowhere to go, I made myself a quiet promise. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to call. I wasn't going to let him watch me fail. I was going to disappear. And I was going to build. What my father didn't know, couldn't know as he stood behind that locked door warm and unbothered, was that the daughter he just discarded was going to spend the next 5 years constructing something he couldn't imagine. Quietly. Deliberately. While he heard absolutely nothing from me. And 5 years later, almost to the exact month, my father would walk through the glass doors of my tech firm, a company valued at over $30 million. Resume printed, collar pressed, completely unaware of who owned the building he had just walked into. He didn't recognize the company name at first. But when he looked up from the front desk and saw my face, not as his daughter but as his potential employer, I watched every drop of color leave his face in real time. That moment is where this story ends. But you need to understand how it began. Because the version of me that stood in that lobby wasn't built in a boardroom. She was built in the rain. On an empty street. With nothing but $43 and a promise nobody else heard her make. If this is already hitting close to home, if you know what it feels like to be thrown away by someone who was supposed to love you, drop your city in the comments right now. Let me know you're watching. Hit subscribe because we are just getting started. Let's go back to the very beginning. So there I was, standing in the lobby of the company I built from nothing. The marble floors. The floor-to-ceiling glass. My name on the wall behind reception in clean, brushed steel letters. And my father, sitting in one of the waiting chairs across from me, resume folded in his hands, not yet realizing that the woman who had just walked through those doors was the same daughter he had pushed out into the freezing rain 5 years ago. He looked older. Smaller somehow. The confidence I remembered, that heavy, suffocating authority he used to carry through every room, it wasn't there anymore. He looked up. And the moment his eyes found my face, his whole body went still. I didn't smile. I didn't rush toward him. I didn't cry. I just looked at him, calm, steady, completely in control, and said, "Hello, Dad. I'll be conducting your interview today." And that is exactly where I'm going to stop, for just a moment. Because before I tell you what happened next inside that room, I need to know that you're here with me. If this story is already sitting heavy on your chest, if you know what it feels like to be thrown away by someone who should have chosen you, hit the like button right now. It takes 2 seconds and it tells me this story matters to you. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. This is a long story and every chapter counts. And drop your city in the comments below. Just your city. So, I want to know where in the world you're watching this from. Because trust me, you're going to want to stay for what comes next. Now, Let's go all the way back to the beginning. My father's name is Richard. And to everyone outside our home he was a good man. That is the part that used to mess with my head the most. He coached Marcus's little league team on Saturdays. He remembered the names of our neighbors' children. He made people laugh at church. He was the kind of man who got a warm smile and a firm handshake wherever he went. And I used to watch that happen and feel something I couldn't name as a child. It took me years to find the word for it. Grief. Because inside our home that man did not exist. Inside our home there were 2 children, but only one of them mattered. And from as early as I can remember, it was made very clear to me which one I was. Marcus got the new bicycle. I got his old one with the rusted chain. Marcus got tutoring when he struggled in math. When I struggled, my father told me to figure it out, that life wasn't going to hold my hand. Marcus got celebrated at the dinner table. His grades, his goals, his potential, all of it discussed like it was the most important thing in the world. My grades were better. Nobody discussed them. I don't think my father was even fully aware of how consistent it was. That's what made it so hard to name. It wasn't one dramatic moment. It was 1,000 small ones stacked on top of each other over years, each one just small enough to make me feel like I was being dramatic for noticing. But I noticed. I noticed the way his face lit up differently when Marcus walked into a room. I noticed how he introduced us to people. This is Marcus, he wants to be an engineer. And then almost as an afterthought, and this is Elena. No ambitions attached to my name. No pride in his voice. Just Elena. Like I was furniture he was obligated to mention. I noticed the way arguments in our house always ended the same way. If Marcus and I ever had a conflict, the resolution was never an investigation into what actually happened. It was an assumption. And the assumption was always the same. I was the problem. My mother, and I want to be careful here because her story is complicated. My mother loved me. I believe that. But she had spent so many years managing my father's moods that she had learned to go quiet in the moments that mattered most. Her silence wasn't cruelty. It was survival. But to a young girl watching it happen, it felt like abandonment all the same. By the time I was 15, I had stopped bringing things home to celebrate. A scholarship nomination. A short story I'd written that my English teacher said was exceptional. A letter from a science competition I'd placed in regionally. I kept all of it in a shoebox under my bed. Because showing my father felt worse than not showing him at all. At least with the shoebox, the achievement stayed clean. Untouched. His indifference couldn't reach it there. I became very good at being invisible. At taking up the least possible space. At needing nothing from anyone in that house. Looking back now, I understand that I was not protecting myself from rejection. I was rehearsing independence. Every time I solved a problem on my own, every time I swallowed a disappointment without letting it show, every time I figured something out without asking for help, I was quietly, unknowingly building the muscles I would need later. I just didn't know it yet. What I knew at 15, and at 16 and 17 and 18, was that I was on my own inside that house. The night in the rain just made it official. The night my father threw me out was not random. I need you to understand that. Because when I first started telling this story to people, close friends, my therapist, eventually a mentor who became very important to me, the reaction was always the same. Disbelief. He just threw you out. Out of nowhere. No, not out of nowhere. There was a trigger. And it was so small, so disproportionate to what followed, that it tells you everything you need to know about where my father's head was by the time I turned 19. I had gotten a full scholarship. Not a partial one. Not a local one. A full merit-based scholarship to a university 3 states away, covering tuition, housing, everything. I had applied in secret, written every essay alone, gathered my own recommendation letters and submitted the application without telling a single person in that house. As I already knew. I already knew that if I told my father I was applying, something would happen to make it smaller. A comment. A doubt planted carefully enough to look like concern. A reason why it probably wouldn't work out. So I kept it quiet. And when the acceptance letter arrived, I kept that quiet too. For 3 weeks. I was trying to find the right moment. Trying to figure out how to say it in a way that would land well. That was the kind of mental gymnastics I had been doing my entire life. Managing the delivery of my own good news so that my father's reaction wouldn't ruin it. I never got the chance to deliver it at all. He found the letter. I don't know if he was going through my things deliberately or if it was accidental. What I know is that he came downstairs holding that envelope, and the look on his face was not pride. It was not surprise. It was something colder than both of those things. He told me I was ungrateful. That I had gone behind his back. That a daughter who respected her family would have discussed something this significant instead of sneaking around. He said the word sneaking like I had done something shameful. Like applying for a scholarship to build my own future was an act of betrayal. I tried to explain. I stayed calm. I used every conflict management instinct I had developed over 19 years of living in that house. It didn't matter. The argument escalated in the way arguments with my father always did. One direction, one destination, no detours. Marcus came downstairs at some point and stood in the doorway watching. My mother sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded and said nothing. And then my father said the thing that ended it. He told me that if I wanted to go so badly I could go tonight. I looked at him for a long moment. I think some part of me was still waiting, even then, even after everything, for him to take it back. For something human to flicker across his face. It didn't. So I went upstairs. I packed one bag, as much as I could fit in 15 minutes. I came back downstairs, walked past my father without a word, and opened the front door. It was pouring. I stepped out anyway. The door closed behind me. I heard the lock turn. And standing there in the freezing rain, 19 years old, scholarship letter folded in my jacket pocket. The only thing I had thought to grab besides clothes. I made myself that promise. Never again. Never beg. Never look back. Just build. And that is exactly what I did. The first 6 months were the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. And I say that as someone who has since navigated failed funding rounds, a near collapse of my company in year 3, and a lawsuit from a former business partner that lasted 14 months. None of it, not one single moment of it, was harder than those first 6 months. I arrived on campus with one bag, $43, and a scholarship that covered tuition and housing. What it didn't cover was everything else. Food beyond the meal plan. Winter clothes that actually fit. The laptop I needed for my computer science coursework. The small, invisible costs of existing that nobody warns you about when they hand you an acceptance letter. I took 3 jobs in my first semester. Campus library, Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings. A coffee shop 2 blocks from campus, Thursday and Saturday evenings. And on Sunday afternoons I tutored freshman math students for $10 an hour in the common room of my dormitory. I was running on 5 hours of sleep most nights. My grades were not perfect that first year. They were good, but not the grades I was capable of, because I was spending hours every week that my classmates were spending studying, just trying to keep the lights on in my own life. But I did not call home. Not once. There were nights, I won't pretend there weren't, where I sat on the edge of my dormitory bed and stared at my phone. Not because I wanted to hear my father's voice, but because I was 20 years old and exhausted, and I wanted someone who was supposed to love me to ask if I was okay. Nobody called either. So I put the phone down. And I went back to work. The turning point came in my second year, and it came in the form of a woman named Dr. Carol Simmons. She was a professor in the computer science department. Sharp, no nonsense, the kind of woman who had clearly spent decades being the only person like her in every room she entered. She saw something in a paper I submitted for her software architecture class and asked me to stay behind after the lecture one afternoon. She told me the paper was exceptional. Then she asked me what my plan was. I told her I didn't have one beyond graduating and finding a job. She looked at me the way someone looks at you when they can see further down your road than you can. And she said, "That's not a plan. That's a waiting room. Come to my office hours on Thursday." I went. And I kept going. Every week for the rest of my degree, Dr. Simmons introduced me to the concept of building something of my own. Not working for someone else's vision, building mine. She connected me to a small startup incubator the university ran quietly for undergraduate students. She helped me apply for a microgrant that gave me enough funding to buy my first real laptop and start prototyping an idea I'd had since freshman year. A lightweight project management tool designed specifically for small teams in underserved markets. It was not glamorous. The first version was embarrassing, honestly. But it worked. And a few people started using it. And then a few more. By the time I graduated, debt-free, scholarship intact, GPA recovered to a 3.9 in my final 2 years. That side project had 200 active users and had been accepted into a competitive accelerator program in the city. I was 23 years old. I had a co-founder, a product, and a plan. I had not spoken to my father in 4 years. And I was just getting started. By the time I was 24, the company had a name. Nexra. A lightweight, intuitive project management platform built for small and mid-sized teams who couldn't afford the bloated enterprise tools dominating the market. We had bootstrapped our way through the accelerator, secured a seed round of $800,000, and were sitting at just over 4,000 active users with a monthly recurring revenue that made our early investors very happy. I had an office. A small team of 7 people I had hired carefully and deliberately, people who were sharp, hungry, and kind because I had decided very early that I would never build a culture that felt like the house I grew up in. No favorites. No invisible hierarchies. No one made to feel like they were less than. I was proud of what we had built. Quietly, fiercely proud. And then my father called. I stared at the name on my screen for a long time before I answered. 4 years of silence. 4 years of zero contact. No birthday calls, no holiday messages, nothing. And now, on a Tuesday afternoon in October while I was sitting at my desk reviewing a product roadmap, his name appeared on my phone like it had never been gone. I answered. I don't fully know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe that old, stubborn corner of my heart that had never fully stopped hoping he had changed. He hadn't. The call lasted 11 minutes. He spent the first 4 of them making small talk, asking how I was, commenting on the weather, telling me Marcus had just gotten promoted, setting the table. And then he got to the point. He had been laid off. 6 months ago, it turned out, he had been sitting on that information for 6 months before deciding to call me. The company he had worked at for 12 years had gone through a restructuring and his entire department had been eliminated. He had been job hunting since then with no success. Money was tight. He was too proud to say the word help directly, so instead he said he was just reaching out and that he thought maybe I might know someone given the industry I was apparently in now. Apparently. That word told me everything about how much attention he had been paying. I kept my voice neutral. I asked a few questions. I told him I would see what I could do. And then I ended the call, set my phone face down on my desk and sat very still for a long moment. My co-founder, Priya, knocked on my office door about 10 minutes later. She said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told her it was more complicated than that. That evening I did something I had not allowed myself to do in 4 years. I looked my father up. LinkedIn. Local news. Anything I could find. And what I discovered was that he hadn't just been struggling since the layoff. He had been struggling for a while. Second mortgage on the house. Marcus, it turned out, had moved across the country the year before. That promotion he'd mentioned was in Seattle. My mother had taken a part-time job at a grocery store. The man who had stood behind a locked door while his teenage daughter stood in freezing rain was now sitting in the house he'd built his kingdom in, alone, financially strained, and quietly desperate enough to call the daughter he hadn't spoken to in 4 years. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something much quieter, much more complicated. But I also knew with complete clarity exactly what I was going to do next. I was going to post the job listing. And I was going to let him find it himself. I posted the listing 3 days after that phone call. Operations Manager. Nexer Technologies. Competitive salary, full benefits, hybrid schedule. A real position, one we had actually been planning to fill for 2 months. I wasn't manufacturing an opportunity to humiliate him. I was simply making sure that when the opportunity presented itself, I didn't hide it. I sent him nothing. No email. No follow-up call. No hint. I just posted it publicly on every major job board the way we always did. And then I waited. It took 11 days. His application came through on a Wednesday morning, submitted through our standard HR portal like every other candidate. Richard Calloway. I recognized the email address immediately. My hands were completely steady when I opened it. I read through his resume carefully. 12 years of operations experience, solid credentials, genuinely qualified on paper. I forwarded it to our HR lead, Maya, and told her to schedule him for a first-round interview without mentioning my connection to him. I wanted the process to be clean. I wanted there to be absolutely no question later about whether what happened was professional. He passed the first round. Maya came to me afterward and said he had interviewed well. Prepared, articulate, clearly experienced. She recommended moving him to the second round, a panel interview that I would be present for along with 2 of our senior team leads. I told her to schedule it. The morning of the interview I arrived early. I was calm in the way that you are calm when you have had a long time to prepare for something. Not the absence of feeling but the complete management of it. I wore a simple blazer. I made coffee. I reviewed his application one more time. And then I walked into the lobby to greet the panel candidates personally the way I always did. He was sitting in the 3rd chair from the left. He was wearing a navy suit that looked like it had been freshly pressed. He was holding a leather portfolio on his lap. He looked from a distance, exactly like the composed, authoritative man I remembered from my childhood. And then he looked up. I watched it happen in slow motion. The recognition. The confusion. The disbelief. The color leaving his face in a wave, starting at his forehead and moving downward until he looked almost gray under the lobby lighting. I crossed the room at the same pace I always walked. I extended my hand the way I would to any candidate. "Hello, Dad. I'll be conducting your interview today." The words landed exactly the way I had imagined they would, except quieter. I hadn't said them to wound him. I had said them because they were simply true. He shook my hand. I will give him that. His grip was weak, but he shook it. We went into the conference room. The panel was professional throughout. I asked him the same questions we asked every candidate, about leadership philosophy, conflict resolution, how he managed underperforming team members. That last question, I'll admit, I let sit in the air a moment longer than necessary. He answered everything. His voice only broke once. At the end, I thanked him for his time the way I thanked every candidate. I told him our team would be in touch within 5 business days. I stood up, shook his hand again and walked him back to the lobby. At the door he stopped. He turned to face me. And for the first time in my adult life my father looked at me, really looked at me and said, "Elena, I am so sorry." I held his gaze for a long moment. Then I said, "I know. We'll be in touch, Mr. Calloway." And I walked back inside. I did not hire him. I want to be upfront about that because I know what you're thinking. And I know what the satisfying ending to this story looks like from the outside. The daughter who is thrown out in the rain becomes the boss, hires her father, and spends every day being his superior while he quietly learns his lesson. Poetic. Pling. A perfect karmic circle. But that's not what healing looks like. And I had spent too many years doing the actual work of healing to undo it for the sake of a clean narrative. Maya and the panel agreed that while Richard was qualified, another candidate was a stronger fit for where Nexer was heading. That decision was made honestly without my interference in either direction. I had been careful about that. I needed to be able to look at myself clearly regardless of how the story ended. He received the standard rejection email 5 days later. Professional, warm, encouraging. The same one every unsuccessful candidate received. I don't know how he took it. He didn't call again. What I do know is this, and I have thought about it carefully, talked about it with my therapist, sat with it on quiet evenings when the office is empty and the city is settling down outside my window. I forgive my father. Not for him. He has not earned that, and forgiveness is not a gift you hand to someone because they've finally hit a low point and felt a flicker of remorse. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself. A quiet, private decision to stop letting someone else's failures live rent-free in the center of your chest. I forgave him because I refused to carry him any further. But forgiveness is not reconciliation. And that distinction took me a long time to learn. You can release someone completely, wish them no harm, hold them no hatred, and still choose not to let them back into your life. Those two things are not in conflict. They can exist together peacefully in the same heart. My chosen family understood this without me having to explain it. Priya, who has been my co-founder and closest friend for 6 years now. Dr. Simmons, who still answers my calls and still looks at me like she can see further down my road than I can. The small, fierce circle of people I have gathered around myself over the years. People who chose me deliberately, without obligation, without condition. That is the family I was building all along. I just didn't have the language for it when I was 19, standing in the rain. Nexer crossed $30 million in valuation last spring. We have 41 employees. We are profitable. And every single morning when I walk through those glass doors, past my name on the wall, I think about that shoebox under my bed. The scholarship letter. The $43. The door that locked behind me. Not with bitterness. With something closer to gratitude, not for the pain but for the clarity it forced on me. For the version of myself it required me to become. So here is what I want to leave you with, because I know some of you are watching this from a very difficult place right now. If someone has thrown you away, a parent, a partner, a person you loved and trusted, please hear me when I say this. Their inability to see your value is not evidence of your value. It never was. You are allowed to grieve what you deserved and never received. And you are also allowed to stand up, pick up your bag and walk into the rain. Because sometimes the door locking behind you is the best thing that ever happens to you. It was for me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs it today. I'll see you in the next one.